The silk was still warm. That is what the Duke of Blackwood wrote in his private journals in the winter of 1819. He stood alone on the grand terrace, the music of the masquerade fading behind him, holding a torn strip of crimson fabric. A woman had just vanished into the fog, leaving behind a mystery that would threaten to topple the British aristocracy. She wasn't just a fleeing lover. She was a fugitive, carrying a secret that could hang them both. Who was she? Why did she look at him with eyes full of terror? And why, years later, would historians find her name erased from the family records? This is the story of the girl who ran, and the Duke who hunted her down. The grand clock in the hallway of Blackwood Manor chimed the quarter hour, 11:15 p.m. It was November 18th, 1819. The air inside the ballroom was thick with the scent of beeswax candles, expensive French perfume, and the underlying metallic tang of anxiety. To the 300 guests in attendance, the masquerade ball thrown by Sebastian Thorne, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, was the social event of the Sussex season. To Stella Caroline, it was a death trap. Stella stood near the periphery of the dance floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was not supposed to be here. By day, she was Eleanor, a scullery maid who scrubbed the limestone floors of this very estate until her knuckles bled. But tonight, she was a phantom in a stolen crimson gown, her face obscured by a heavy silk veil. She hadn't come to dance. She had come to save a life. Earlier that evening, while polishing the silver in the butler's pantry, Stella had overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Lord Lucian Thorne, the Duke's estranged cousin, had whispered to a shadowy figure about a glass of wine, a specific vintage of Bordeaux, destined for the Duke at midnight. 2 drops, Lucian had said. By morning, Blackwood will be mine. Stella knew the penalty for a servant impersonating nobility was imprisonment, perhaps even hanging. But Sebastian, the Duke, had been the only one to show her kindness when she arrived at the estate, starving and desperate, 6 months ago. He had once stopped his carriage to ensure she wasn't walking in the rain. She couldn't let him die. "May I?" The voice was deep, vibrating through the floorboards. Stella froze. She turned to see Sebastian Thorne standing before her. Even behind his black velvet mask, his presence was overwhelming. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and imposing, known throughout England as the Iron Duke for his cold demeanor. But his eyes, piercingly blue, were currently fixed on her with intense curiosity. I am not dancing, Your Grace," Stella whispered, disguising her voice. "Then why are you trembling?" Sebastian asked, stepping closer. He didn't wait for an answer. He took her hand. His touch was electric. It wasn't a cliché. It was a terrifying physical reality. Stella gasped. She felt the calluses on his palm, the hands of a man who fenced and rode, not just a pampered aristocrat. He pulled her into the waltz. For 2 minutes, the world dissolved. As they spun, Sebastian leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You don't move like the others," he murmured. "You move like you're running from something. Who are you?" Stella opened her mouth to warn him about the wine, to whisper the truth. "The poison. Midnight. Your cousin." But as she turned her head, her gaze locked on a figure standing by the orchestra. It was Lord Lucian. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was staring directly at her, and then his eyes narrowed. He recognized the dress. It belonged to his own wife, a dress Stella had pilfered from the laundry pile. Lucian took a step forward, his hand moving to the pistol tucked in his waist sash. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded Stella's veins. If she spoke now, Lucian would shoot them both, or he would expose her, and she would be dragged away before she could prove the plot. "I have to go," she choked out. "What?" Sebastian tightened his grip. "No, tell me your name. Let me go." Stella wrenched herself away with the desperation of a hunted animal. She spun on her heel, the crimson silk of her gown creating a whirlwind. Sebastian lunged to catch her, his fingers snagging on the delicate silk veil covering her face. "Right." The sound was sharp, cutting through the violins. The veil tore loose. For a split second, her back was to him, her hair tumbling down in a cascade of chestnut waves. She didn't look back. She hiked up the heavy skirts and sprinted, not a graceful retreat, but a frantic dash toward the garden doors. Sebastian stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, the guests gasping around him. In his hand, he held the long strip of crimson silk. It still smelled of her, not of expensive perfume, but of lavender soap and rain. He looked at the open doors where the cold night air was rushing in. "Lock the gates!" Sebastian roared, his voice silencing the music instantly. "No one leaves Blackwood tonight." The silence of the library was oppressive. It was 2 a.m. The guests had been dismissed after an agonizing hour of searches, but the mysterious woman in red had vanished into the ether. Sebastian sat in his leather armchair, the torn veil draped over his knee. Opposite him sat Captain Thomas Halloway, the head of the local militia and Sebastian's oldest friend. "She's gone, Sebastian," Thomas said, pouring a brandy. "We searched the grounds. We searched the carriages. She simply evaporated." "Women do not evaporate, Thomas," Sebastian growled. He ran his thumb over the fabric. "She was terrified. Did you see her eyes? She wasn't playing a game. Perhaps a thief." "Nothing was stolen," Sebastian countered, "and she wasn't a noble woman. I know every family in Sussex. Her hands, they were rough. Small but rough. Workers' hands." Sebastian stood up and paced the room. The memory of the waltz haunted him. He had felt a connection in those brief moments that he hadn't felt since his wife died 5 years ago. But it was more than attraction. It was instinct. She had looked at him with a mixture of longing and horror. "The dress," Sebastian said suddenly. "Did anyone identify the dress?" Thomas hesitated. Lord Lucian mentioned it looked familiar. He claimed it resembled one of his wife's old gowns, one sent to the laundry days ago. Sebastian stopped pacing. The laundry. "If she didn't leave the estate," Sebastian said slowly, his eyes darkening, "and she was wearing a stolen dress sent to the laundry, then she didn't arrive in a carriage, Thomas." "You think she's still here?" "I think she lives here." Sebastian slammed his hand on the desk. "Wake the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. I want every female servant in this house lined up in the great hall at dawn, every maid, every cook, every washerwoman." "Sebastian, this is madness," Thomas warned. "You can't interrogate your own staff over a dance." "It wasn't just a dance," Sebastian shouted, losing his composure for the first time. He lowered his voice, looking at the veil. "She was trying to tell me something. I felt her trembling. She was warning me." Meanwhile, in the damp, stone-walled servants' quarters below the manor, Stella Carolyn was scrubbing her skin raw. She had burned the crimson dress in the kitchen furnace, watching the silk curl into ash. She was back in her coarse grey shift, her hair braided tight against her skull. She was shaking uncontrollably. She had failed. She hadn't warned him. And now she had seen the guards locking the gates. "Eleanor?" Stella jumped. It was Sarah, the young scullery maid who shared her bunk. Sarah sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Where have you been? You smell like smoke." "Just tending the fires," Stella lied, her voice cracking. "You missed the excitement," Sarah whispered, wide-eyed. "The master is in a rage. They say a woman broke into the ball and put a curse on him. They're saying he's going to turn the house upside down tomorrow." Stella lay down on her straw mattress, pulling the scratchy wool blanket over her head. She squeezed her eyes shut, but all she could see was Sebastian's blue eyes and the confusion in them as she tore away. She had to leave. She had to run away tonight. But she had no money, no family, and nowhere to go. If she ran, Lucien's men would find her in the woods. If she stayed, Sebastian would find her in the lineup. And if Sebastian found her, he would ask why she ran. And if she told the truth about Lucien, the Duke's own cousin would ensure she didn't live to see the sunset. Stella Caroline was trapped in the lion's den, and the lion was waking up. Dawn broke over Sussex with a grey, weeping sky. The rain lashed against the high windows of the great hall, where 40 women stood in a shivering line. The atmosphere was thick with fear. Mrs. Gable, the stern housekeeper, walked up and down the line, straightening aprons and scolding girls for loose strands of hair. But even Mrs. Gable looked nervous. At the head of the room, Sebastian Thorne stood like a statue. He hadn't slept. He was still wearing his formal breeches and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing powerful forearms. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like an executioner. He walked slowly down the line. He didn't speak. He just looked. He was looking for a height, a shape, a scent. Stella stood near the end of the line, wedged between Sarah and an older cook. She kept her head bowed, staring at her worn leather boots. Her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy. "Don't look up," she chanted internally. "Don't look up." Sebastian paused 3 girls away. He stopped in front of a tall chambermaid. He took her hand, inspected it, and then moved on. He was checking their hands. Stella suppressed a whimper. She had been a noblewoman once, before her father's gambling debts ruined them and forced her into hiding. But 6 months of scrubbing floors had roughened her palms. Would they be rough enough to pass? Or would he feel the lingering softness of her past life? He was in front of her. She could smell him. Sandalwood and stale tobacco, the scent of the man she had held hours ago. "Name," Sebastian said. His voice was devoid of the warmth he had shown in the ballroom. "Eleanor, Your Grace," she whispered, bobbing a clumsy curtsy. She kept her eyes on the floor. "Look at me, Eleanor." It was a command, not a request. Stella forced her chin up. She tried to make her eyes look vacant, dull, like a simple girl who knew nothing of waltzes or politics. Sebastian stared at her. His gaze drifted over her high cheekbones, the smudge of soot she had deliberately left on her forehead to mar her complexion. He frowned. "Give me your hand." Stella extended her right hand. It was trembling. Sebastian took it. His thumb grazed her palm, just as it had during the dance. He paused. His grip tightened imperceptibly. Stella stopped breathing. He knew. Sebastian didn't let go. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. "You use lavender soap," he said softly. It wasn't a question. It is all we have in the laundry, Your Grace," she stammered. "And yet," Sebastian said, raising his voice so the room could hear, "you are the only one trembling." He turned to Mrs. Gable. "This one. She is reassigned." "Your Grace?" Mrs. Gable blinked. "Eleanor is a scullery maid. She is clumsy and mute half the time." "Not any more," Sebastian said, his eyes never leaving Stella's terrified face. "She is now my personal serving maid. She will attend to my quarters, starting immediately." A ripple of shock went through the line of servants. To be the Duke's personal maid was a position of power, but the way Sebastian said it sounded like a prison sentence. "Everyone else is dismissed," Sebastian commanded. As the other servants hurried away, casting jealous or pitying glances at Stella, She remained rooted to the spot. She was alone with him in the vast, cold hall. Sebastian stepped closer until he was looming over her. He didn't yell. He lowered his voice to a dangerous, intimate whisper. "You ran from me, Eleanor," he said, testing the name like a false coin. "You ran and you burned the dress. I can smell the smoke in your hair." Stella's knees buckled, but he caught her by the elbow, holding her up. "I don't know what you mean, Your Grace," she lied, tears pricking her eyes. "Stop lying," Sebastian hissed. "I don't care about the dress. I don't care that you crashed the ball. But you looked at my cousin Lucian with fear, and then you looked at me with terror. You know something." He pulled her closer, his grip bruising. "You are going to tell me exactly who you are and what poison has seeped into my house. And until you do, you will not leave my sight. Do you understand?" Stella looked into his blue eyes and saw the trap snapping shut. She nodded slowly. "Good," Sebastian said, releasing her abruptly. "Go to my study. Wait for me. And Eleanor?" She paused. "If you run again," he said, "I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." The walk to the East Wing felt like a march to the gallows. The hallways of Blackwood Manor were wide and draughty, lined with the stone busts of Sebastian's ancestors, men with cruel mouths and eyes that seemed to follow Stella as she passed. She entered the Duke's private study. It was a masculine room, smelling of old leather bindings, pipe tobacco, and the faint, sharp scent of ink. Rain lashed against the tall Gothic windows, blurring the world outside into grey smears. Stella stood by the heavy oak door, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her apron that her knuckles turned white. She waited. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with agonizing slowness. Tick, tock, tick, tock, each sound amplifying the silence. Finally, the door handle turned. Sebastian entered. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with a soft, deliberate click that sounded like a lock snapping shut. He didn't look at her immediately. He walked to his desk, unbuttoning his cuffs, and poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Do you know why I chose you, Eleanor?" he asked, his back turned to her. Stella swallowed, her throat dry. "Because I was trembling, Your Grace." "No." Sebastian turned around. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes pinning her to the spot. "I chose you because when I grabbed your arm in the Great Hall, you didn't flinch away in fear. You braced yourself. You prepared to fight." He set the glass down and walked toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat, silent, heavy, and dangerous. "A scullery maid who knows how to waltz," he mused, stopping just inches from her. "A servant who smells of lavender soap, which costs a week's wages for a bar, and a woman who looks at my cousin Lucian as if he is the devil himself." Sebastian reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The touch was shocking in its intimacy. Stella stopped breathing. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice rough. "And do not lie to me again. My patience has bled out." Stella's mind raced. If she told him she was Lady Stella Caroline, daughter of the disgraced Earl of Caroline, he would know her father had committed suicide after being accused of treason. Treason that Sebastian's own political allies had exposed. She would be an enemy in his house. "I am no one," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Just a girl who wants to survive." Sebastian studied her face, searching for the truth in her eyes. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw a defiance that fascinated him. He leaned in, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Survival is a dangerous game in this house," he murmured. You are going to stay in this room. You will pour my wine. You will light my fire. You will read to me if I ask. And you will not leave this wing without my permission. You are my prisoner, Eleanor, in everything but chains." He turned away abruptly, breaking the spell. "Fix the fire. It's freezing in here." Stella let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She moved to the fireplace, kneeling on the hearth rug. Her hands shook as she arranged the logs. She was safe, for now. But she was trapped in the very center of the web, and she knew the spider was coming, not Sebastian, but Lucian. As if summoned by her fear, a knock echoed on the heavy oak door. "Enter," Sebastian called out, sitting behind his desk and picking up a quill. The door opened, and Lord Lucian Thorne strolled in. Stella froze. She was on her knees by the fire, her back to the door. She hunched her shoulders, making herself small, praying the shadows would swallow her. "Sebastian?" Lucian's voice was smooth, like oil sliding over jagged rocks. "I didn't see you at breakfast, dealing with the aftermath of your little intruder?" "Just a thief," Sebastian said, without looking up from his papers. "Thomas is handling it." "Is he?" Lucian walked further into the room. Stella could hear his footsteps on the Persian rug. They were getting closer to the fireplace. "You know, cousin, you should be more careful. A woman like that, slipping past your guards, it suggests a weakness in your defenses." "My defenses are fine, Lucian." "Are they?" Lucian stopped. Stella could feel his gaze on her back. "And who is this? A new comfort?" Stella squeezed her eyes shut. "Don't turn around. Don't turn around." "My new personal maid," Sebastian said dismissively. "Eleanor, pour Lord Lucian a drink." Stella's heart stopped. She had to stand up. She had to face him. If Lucian recognized her from the ball, or worse, from her life before, when she had seen him at court, it was over. "Eleanor," Sebastian's voice was sharp. "Did you hear me?" Stella rose slowly. She kept her head bowed so low her chin touched her chest. She wiped her soot-stained hands on her apron, hoping the dirt would mask her features. She walked to the side table where the decanters stood. She could feel Lucian's eyes boring into her. "A bit grimy for a personal maid, isn't she?" Lucian sneered. "She is efficient," Sebastian replied. Stella picked up the heavy crystal decanter. Her hands were trembling violently. As she reached for a glass, she saw it. Lucian was resting his hand on Sebastian's desk. On his pinky finger was a large onyx ring. Stella knew that ring. Her father had warned her about men who wore rings with hidden latches, poison rings. And then she saw Lucian's other hand. He was sliding a small, silver snuff box toward Sebastian's open ledger. "I brought you some tobacco from the Indies," Lucian said, smiling. "A peace offering for the disruption last night." Sebastian reached for the box. Stella didn't think. She didn't plan. She acted on pure instinct. As she turned with the wine glass, she feigned a stumble. She pitched forward, crying out, and hurled the full glass of red wine across the room. Crash! The crystal shattered against the side of the desk. The red wine exploded outward, soaking the papers, the ledger, and splashing heavily onto Lucian's pristine white waistcoat and breeches. "You stupid girl!" Lucian roared, jumping back, his face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly rage. The snuff box was knocked to the floor in the chaos, sliding under the heavy sofa. Sebastian stood up, his face thunderous. "Eleanor!" Stella fell to her knees amidst the broken glass. "I'm sorry. I tripped. The rug. I'm so clumsy." She began frantically picking up the shards, cutting her fingers, letting her own blood mix with the wine on the floor. Lucian was shaking with fury. He raised his hand as if to strike her. "I should have you whipped in the courtyard." "Lucian!" Sebastian's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "She is my servant to discipline, not yours." Lucian froze, his hand in the air. He looked at Sebastian, then at Stella, who was cowering on the floor. He took a deep breath, composing himself, but his eyes remained cold and deadly. "Of course," Lucian said, patting his stained waistcoat. "Forgive me. The shock. It seems I must change." He looked around the floor. "My snuff box." "Leave it," Sebastian snapped. "Get out, Lucian. You've done enough damage to my patience today." Lucian hesitated. He looked at the sofa, where the box had vanished. He couldn't retrieve it without looking desperate. "Very well," Lucian muttered. He cast one last, venomous look at Stella. "You should teach her some grace, Sebastian. Or get rid of her. Accidents can be fatal." With that, Lucian stormed out. The room fell into silence again. The only sound was the rain and Stella's ragged breathing. She was still on her knees, gripping a shard of glass so tight it sliced into her palm. Sebastian walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her. "Stand up." Stella stood, shaking. She held her bleeding hand behind her back. Sebastian looked at the wine soaking into his expensive rug. Then he looked at her. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You didn't trip," he said quietly. Stella looked up, startled. "I saw your feet," Sebastian whispered. "You didn't catch the rug. You threw that glass. You threw it at him." He grabbed her wrist, pulling her bleeding hand forward. He looked at the cut, then into her eyes. "Why?" Sebastian demanded, his voice intense, searching. "Why would a maid risk a whipping to ruin a duke's waistcoat? What did you see, Eleanor?" Stella couldn't speak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her lightheaded. The scent of the wine was overpowering, smelling like blood. "The box," she whispered. Sebastian frowned. "What?" "The snuff box," Stella said, her voice trembling. "Do not open it. Do not touch the tobacco inside." Sebastian released her hand and walked over to the sofa. He knelt and retrieved the silver box Lucian had left behind. He held it up to the light. It was beautiful, engraved with serpents. "Why?" Sebastian asked, turning the box over in his hands. "Because," Stella said, tears finally spilling over her lashes, "Lord Lucian does not smoke tobacco. He has asthma. I heard him wheezing in the hallway yesterday." Sebastian went still. It was a small detail, one easily missed by a man who saw his cousin rarely. But a servant? A servant who scrubbed floors and listened to the echoes of the house? They knew everything. Sebastian slowly opened the box. Inside, the dark leaves were dusted with a fine white powder. It wasn't much. Just enough to coat the lungs. Just enough to stop a heart in the middle of the night. He looked up at Stella. The realization washed over him, cold and hard. "He tried to kill me," Sebastian said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "My own blood. He wants the title," Stella whispered. "He spoke of it. In the pantry. Last night. That is why I came to the ball. I tried to warn you." Sebastian stared at her. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The woman in red. The fear. The desperate flight. She hadn't been running from him. She had been running for him. He crossed the room in 2 long strides. He didn't stop until he was towering over her. But this time, there was no anger in his posture. There was awe. "You saved my life," he said softly. "Twice." He reached out and took her injured hand. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it tenderly around her bleeding palm. "Who are you?" he asked again. But this time it wasn't a demand. It was a plea. "Please, I cannot protect you if I do not know the truth. Lucian will come back. He will realize you know. He will kill you, Eleanor." Stella looked at the handkerchief binding her hand. It was white silk, embroidered with the Blackwood crest. It was worth more than her life. She looked up into his blue eyes and saw the wall of ice melting. She saw a man who was alone, surrounded by enemies, just like her. "My name," she said, her voice barely audible over the thunder rattling the windows, "is Stella Caroline." Sebastian froze. He dropped her hand. "Caroline?" he repeated, his face paling. "The daughter of the Earl of Caroline. The traitor." "He was not a traitor," Stella cried out, the secret she had held for 6 months finally bursting forth. "He was framed. He found evidence that money was being stolen from the War Office. He was going to expose it. And the next day, they found the forged letters in his desk. They destroyed him." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "And the man who brought the accusations against my father, the man who led the investigation, was your uncle, the previous Duke." The silence in the room was deafening. Sebastian looked at her with horror. His family had destroyed hers. His legacy was built on the grave of her father. And yet, she had dressed in rags, scrubbed his floors, and risked her life to save him from a poisoned box. "Stella," Sebastian whispered. He reached for her, but she flinched back. "No," she said, backing toward the door. "Now you know. I am the daughter of a traitor. If you are a loyal man of the crown, you should hand me over to the authorities." "Do not be absurd," Sebastian growled, stepping forward and grabbing her shoulders. "Do you think I care about the politics of dead men? Look at me." He shook her gently. "You are staying here," he commanded fiercely, "not as a maid, not as a prisoner. You are staying under my protection." "You cannot protect me from Lucian," Stella sobbed. "He knows I saw the ring. He knows I spilled the wine on purpose. He will come for me tonight." "Let him come," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. He pulled her against his chest. She stiffened, then melted, burying her face in his shirt. He smelled of rain and safety. "Tonight," Sebastian vowed, his chin resting on the top of her head. "You sleep in my chambers." Stella pulled back, eyes wide. "Your Grace, I cannot. The scandal." "To hell with the scandal," Sebastian swore. "There is a lock on my door that not even Lucian can pick. You will sleep on the chaise by the fire, and I will sit by the door with a loaded pistol. And if my cousin takes one step into this hallway, he will learn why they call me the Iron Duke." He looked down at her, his expression softening. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. "You ran from me once, Stella," he whispered. "I will not let you run again." The night was long and full of terrors. Stella lay on the velvet chaise lounge in the Duke's massive bedchamber. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Across the room, Sebastian sat in a high-backed chair, facing the heavy oak door. A flintlock pistol rested on his knee. He hadn't moved for hours. Stella watched him through her lashes. In the dim light, stripped of his formal coat, wearing only a white shirt open at the collar, he looked less like a duke and more like a warrior guarding his treasure. "You are staring." Sebastian's deep voice cut through the darkness. I can't sleep," Stella whispered. "Nor I." Sebastian stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the storm-tossed grounds. "My uncle," he said quietly. "Did he really frame your father?" "I saw the real ledger," Stella said, sitting up. "My father hid it. He told me if anything happened to him, I should burn it. He didn't want me to be targeted. But I couldn't burn it. I hid it." Sebastian turned to face her. "Where is it, Stella?" "In the ruins," she said. "The old abbey on the edge of your estate. I buried it there the night I arrived." Sebastian's eyes widened. "That is on Lucian's land. He owns the dower house near the abbey." "I know," Stella said. "That is why I haven't been able to retrieve it." Sebastian walked over to her. He sat on the edge of the chaise. The distance between them had vanished. In the quiet of the night, the boundaries of servant and master, duke and fugitive, dissolved. "Tomorrow," Sebastian said, "we will go to the abbey. We will get the ledger. We will clear your father's name." "And Lucian? If the ledger proves he or his father was involved in the theft," Sebastian said grimly, "I will hang him myself." He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air in the room shifted. It became thick, heavy with unspoken desire. Stella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Stella," he breathed. He leaned in. Stella didn't pull away. She tilted her head up. Suddenly, a sound shattered the moment. Click. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. But not the door to the hallway. It was the secret door in the panelling behind the Duke's bed, a passage meant for servants, forgotten by everyone except the family. Sebastian spun around, raising his pistol, but he was too late. The panel slid open. A figure stepped out of the darkness, holding a lantern in one hand and a heavy dueling pistol in the other. It was Lucian, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two burly men, guards loyal only to him. "So touching," Lucian sneered, stepping into the bedroom. "The Duke and his maid. Or should I say the Duke and the traitor's daughter?" Lucian raised his pistol and aimed it directly at Stella's heart. "Drop the gun, Sebastian," Lucian commanded, "or she dies before she can take her next breath." Sebastian stood frozen. He looked at Stella, then at the gun aimed at her chest. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his weapon and placed it on the floor. "Smart boy," Lucian smiled. "Now, tie them up. It seems we are going to have a tragic accident. A fire in the Duke's bedroom. A lover's tryst gone wrong. How poetic." The silence that followed Lucian's threat was heavier than the storm raging outside. Inside the Duke's bedchamber, the air had grown thick and suffocating, not from smoke yet, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. Sebastian sat in a heavy oak chair, his hands bound behind him with rough hemp rope. His ankles were lashed to the chair legs. Beside him, tied to a matching chair, was Stella. They had been positioned so they were facing the grand fireplace, forced to watch the flames that would soon consume them. Lord Lucian moved through the room with a terrifying calmness. He didn't rush. He hummed a low, tuneless melody as he uncorked a bottle of high-proof brandy. "You know," Lucian said, splashing the amber liquid over the velvet curtains of the four-poster bed, "I never liked this room. It's too moral, too stiff. Like you, Sebastian." "You won't get away with this," Sebastian said. His voice was low, controlled, but the veins in his neck were cording with the strain of testing his bonds. "The servants will smell the smoke. The guards will come." "The guards are loyal to the coin I paid them," Lucian replied, moving to the wardrobe. He splashed more brandy on the pile of linen shirts. "And as for the servants, I told them you and your little maid wish to be undisturbed for the night. They are halfway to the village for the fair. By the time they see the flames, the roof will have collapsed." Lucian walked over to them. He stopped in front of Stella. He reached out and stroked her cheek with the barrel of his pistol. Stella flinched, pressing her head back against the chair, her breathing shallow and rapid. "A pity," Lucian sighed. "You really are quite beautiful, Lady Caroline. If you hadn't been so nosy, you might have made a fine mistress. Go to hell, Lucian, Stella spat, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched the one in the grate. Lucian laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. I'm afraid you're the ones going to the heat, my dear. He took a candle from the mantelpiece. He held it over the puddle of brandy, soaking into the expensive Persian rug, the same rug where Stella had spilled the wine hours earlier. Goodbye, cousin, Lucian said. Do try not to scream too loud. It's undignified. He dropped the candle. The effect was instant. The alcohol fumes ignited with a whoosh, a wave of blue and orange flame racing across the floor like a living thing. It licked up the curtains, devouring the velvet. Lucian didn't look back. He signaled his men, and they slipped back through the secret panel in the wall, sliding it shut with a heavy thud. The lock clicked. They were alone. Sebastian, Stella whispered, the terror finally cracking her voice. Don't look at the fire, Sebastian commanded. Look at me, Stella. Look at me. She turned her head. His face was inches from hers. The orange glow of the growing inferno illuminated the sweat beading on his forehead. We are not dying here, he swore, his blue eyes intense. I promised I wouldn't let you run. I intend to keep that promise. The ropes, Stella choked out. The smoke was starting to curl toward the ceiling, a grey serpentine layer that burned the throat. They are too tight. My hands, Sebastian gritted out. They tied my wrists, but they didn't check the chair. It's old, the wood is dry. He began to rock. He threw his entire weight, 200 pounds of muscle, against the back of the chair. The old oak groaned. Lean forward, Sebastian yelled over the roar of the fire. Stella, lean forward as far as you can. She bent double, coughing as the smoke descended. Sebastian slammed his weight backward, twisting his torso with violent force. The wood creaked, a high-pitched scream of timber under stress. Snap. One of the vertical slats on the back of his chair gave way, but his hands were still bound to the crossbar. The heat was rising. The curtains were now fully ablaze, sending burning tatters of fabric drifting through the air like fireflies. The temperature in the room spiked. It felt like standing inside an oven. Sebastian! Stella cried. The fire had reached the foot of the bed. If it reached the wardrobe, the explosion of the remaining alcohol would kill them instantly. Sebastian roared, a primal sound of exertion. He ignored the rope biting into his wrists, tearing the skin. He ignored the agony in his shoulders. He threw himself backward one last time, putting every ounce of his desperation into the motion. Crack. The heavy top rail of the chair shattered. His hands were still tied together, but they were no longer attached to the chair back. He scrambled up, the chair still tied to his legs, clattering awkwardly. He fell to his knees beside Stella. Turn around, he shouted. Stella spun in her chair. Sebastian, his hands bound behind his back, fumbled blindly for the knot on her wrists. His fingers were slippery with blood and sweat. The smoke was stinging his eyes, blinding him. I can't find the end, he coughed. The glass, Stella screamed. Sebastian, the wine glass, from this afternoon. I didn't pick up all the pieces. Sebastian looked down. Through the swirling smoke, he saw the glint of crystal near the desk. Shards of the glass Stella had thrown at Lucian. He shuffled backward on his knees, dragging the remains of the chair with him. He found a jagged shard of crystal, sharp as a razor. He couldn't hold it. His hands were bound. Stella, move your chair. Stella hopped her chair backward, inch by agonizing inch, until her bound hands were hovering over the shard Sebastian was pinning down with his own tied fingers. Saw it! Sebastian yelled. Saw the rope against the glass. Stella frantically rubbed the hemp rope against the jagged crystal edge. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The fire roared louder, consuming the bed canopy now. The heat was blistering. A piece of burning wood crashed to the floor just feet away. Snap! Stella's hands flew apart. "I'm free," she sobbed. She immediately spun around, ignoring the burns on her wrists, and clawed at the knots binding Sebastian's legs. Her fingers were nimble, fueled by adrenaline. She untied his ankles, then the ropes on his wrists. Sebastian stood up, shaking the numbness from his bleeding hands. He grabbed Stella, pulling her to her feet. They ran to the door. Sebastian grabbed the handle, locked. He threw his shoulder against it, but the heavy oak was barred from the outside. "The window!" Stella coughed, covering her mouth with her apron. "Too high," Sebastian said, looking at the 3-story drop. "We'd break our necks." He looked at the wall behind the burning bed. The secret panel. "The passage," Sebastian said grimly. "It's the only way." "But the bed is on fire!" Stella screamed. "The panel is behind the headboard." The entire bed was a wall of flame, but the secret catch was hidden in the molding, just to the right of it. Sebastian ripped the heavy velvet coat from his back. He wrapped it around his head and arm. "Stay low," he ordered. He charged into the heat. Stella watched in horror as he disappeared into the wall of fire. For a second, he was gone. Then she heard a heavy clunk of a mechanism disengaging. The panel in the wall popped open, just inches from the flames. Sebastian stumbled back out, his shirt singed, his eyebrows scorched. He grabbed Stella's hand. "Go! Now!" They dove into the darkness of the narrow stone passage just as the ceiling beam of the bedroom collapsed with a thunderous crash, burying the spot where they had been standing seconds ago in a mountain of burning rubble. Sebastian slammed the panel shut from the inside. The roar of the fire was instantly muffled, replaced by the heavy, damp silence of the stone tunnel. It was pitch black. "Are you hurt?" Sebastian's voice was ragged in the dark. I don't think so," Stella whispered, trembling uncontrollably. She reached out and found his arm. His skin was scorching hot. "You're burned." "I'll live," he said tightly. "But we have to move. Lucian thinks we are dead. We have to make sure he stays convinced of that until we have the proof." "The Abbey," Stella realized. "The Abbey," Sebastian confirmed. "Do you know the way through these tunnels?" "No. You are the Duke." "I haven't been in these tunnels since I was a boy playing hide-and-seek," Sebastian admitted. "But if memory serves, this leads to the crypts beneath the chapel. From there, we can get to the stables." They moved slowly through the suffocating darkness, hand in hand. The walls were slimy with moss, and cobwebs brushed against their faces like ghostly fingers. Every sound, a dripping pipe, a scuttling rat, sounded like Lucian's footsteps. It took them 20 minutes to navigate the labyrinth. Finally, they saw a grate of grey light ahead. The exit. They pushed through a rusted iron door and spilled out into the cold, biting rain of the stable yard. The storm was still raging, washing away the soot and sweat from their skin. High above them, flames were licking out of the east wing windows. The alarm bell was finally ringing. Servants were running across the lawn, shouting, carrying buckets of water that would do nothing against such an inferno. "Look!" Sebastian pointed to the chaos. "They are all looking at the fire. No one is watching the horses." They sprinted through the mud, keeping to the shadows. Inside the stables, the horses were restless, smelling the smoke on the wind. Sebastian quickly saddled a massive black stallion, his war horse, Titan. He didn't bother with a saddle for Stella. He mounted, then reached down and pulled her up effortlessly to sit in front of him. "Hold on to me," he whispered against her hair. "Do not let go." Stella wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his chest. She could feel his heart beating. Steady, strong, alive. Sebastian kicked the horse into a gallop. They burst out of the stable doors, not toward the main gate, but toward the backwoods. They thundered past the burning manor, disappearing into the tree line just as the roof of the east wing collapsed in a shower of sparks that lit up the night sky. To the world, the Duke and his maid had just perished, but in the darkness of the forest, two ghosts were riding for vengeance. "Where is the ledger exactly?" Sebastian shouted over the wind as they galloped along the muddy ridge. "The ruins of St. Jude's Abbey," Stella yelled back. "In the ossuary, beneath the stone angel with the broken wing." Sebastian tightened his grip on the reins. The abbey was 3 miles away. It was on Lucian's land. "If we find that ledger," Sebastian said, his voice cold as the rain, "I will not just reclaim my house, Stella. I will burn Lucian's world to the ground." Stella looked up at him. In the flash of lightning, his face was hard, grim, and terrifyingly beautiful. He wasn't just a duke anymore. He was a man who had lost everything but her. "We have to get there before dawn," Stella said. "If Lucian finds out we aren't in the ashes, he will hunt us down." "Let him hunt," Sebastian growled, urging the horse faster into the gloom. "Tonight the prey bites back." They rode on, the mud flying, racing against the sunrise and the death squad that would surely follow once the fire died down and no bodies were found. But as the ruins of the abbey loomed out of the mist, jagged teeth of stone against a purple sky, Stella felt a sudden, chilling dread. There, tethered to the old iron gate of the graveyard, was a horse. A white horse. Lucian's horse. Sebastian pulled on the reins, bringing Titan to a skidding halt. The silence of the graveyard was heavy. "He knows," Sebastian whispered, realizing the trap too late. "He didn't just want us dead. He knew about the abbey." Stella stared at the dark entrance to the ruins. "But how?" "He didn't know about the ledger," Sebastian realized, his hand moving to the sword he had grabbed from the stable wall. "He's just checking his perimeter. Or—" Sebastian looked at Stella. "Or he found the letter your father wrote. The one you said you burned." Stella went pale. I didn't burn it. I kept it. In my apron pocket. The apron I left in the laundry the day I stole the dress." The realization hit them both like a physical blow. Lucian had found the apron. He had found the letter mentioning the abbey. He wasn't at the manor watching the fire. He was here, waiting. They were unarmed, exhausted, and walking straight into the devil's parlor. "Stay on the horse," Sebastian commanded, sliding to the ground. "No," Stella said, sliding down beside him. She grabbed a heavy stone from the ground. "We started this together. We finish it together." Sebastian looked at her, pride warring with fear in his eyes. He nodded once. "Together," he agreed. They walked into the ruins, into the mist, where the final game would be played. The ossuary of St. Jude's Abbey was a place where silence went to die. Sebastian and Stella moved through the shadows, their boots sinking into the wet earth and centuries of decay. They reached the center of the crypt. There, illuminated by a single lantern resting on a sarcophagus, stood the statue of the angel with the broken wing. And sitting at the angel's feet, casually flipping through the pages of a leather-bound ledger, was Lord Lucian. He didn't look up. He simply turned a page, the sound crisp and dry in the damp air. "Fascinating," Lucian's voice echoed off the stone walls. "Your father really was a meticulous man, Lady Stella. He documented every penny my father stole from the War Office, every bribe, every forged signature." Lucian closed the book with a heavy thump. He stood up, smoothing his velvet coat. In his other hand, the heavy dueling pistol was leveled steadily at Sebastian's chest. "He knew I would come," Stella whispered, her hand tightening around the jagged stone she still carried. "Of course I knew." Lucian smiled, though his eyes were dead. "You left a breadcrumb trail of sentimentality. That apron in the laundry? Careless. Give me the book, Lucian." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice calm, masking the coiled violence in his muscles. He held the stolen stable sword low at his side. "It's over. The fire didn't kill us. The smoke didn't kill us. Do you really think you can finish this?" "I think." Lucian cocked the hammer of the pistol, the click loud as a thunder crack. "That a bullet is much more reliable than a fire." He aimed. Not at Sebastian, but at Stella. "Drop the sword, cousin," Lucian commanded, "or I will paint the angel with her blood." Sebastian froze. The sword clattered to the stone floor. "Kick it away." Sebastian kicked the weapon into the darkness. Lucian laughed, a sound of pure triumph. "You always were predictable, Sebastian. Weakened by honor. Weakened by love." Lucian's finger tightened on the trigger. He was going to kill her anyway. Sebastian saw it in his eyes, the contraction of the pupil, the tightening of the jaw. Time seemed to fracture. "Stella, duck!" Sebastian roared. At the same moment, Stella didn't duck. She acted. She hurled the heavy stone she had been concealing. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was desperate. The rock struck Lucian squarely in the shoulder, just as he pulled the trigger. Bang! The shot went wide, chipping the stone wing of the angel, sending razor-sharp shards raining down. Sebastian launched himself. He covered the 10 feet between them in a blur of motion. He collided with Lucian, and the two men went crashing into the stone sarcophagus. The ledger flew from Lucian's hand, sliding across the wet floor into the darkness. They rolled onto the ground, a tangle of limbs and fury. Lucian was smaller, but he fought with the viciousness of a cornered rat. He drew a dagger from his boot, slashing wildly. Sebastian felt the bite of cold steel across his forearm, but he didn't stop. He grabbed Lucian's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped with a sickening crunch. Lucian screamed, dropping the knife. Sebastian didn't let go. He hauled his cousin up by the lapels of his coat and slammed him against the angel statue. "For my house!" Sebastian snarled, landing a brutal punch to Lucian's jaw. "For her father!" He struck again, the force of it knocking Lucian's head back against the stone. "And for her!" Sebastian delivered a final, decisive blow. Lucian crumpled to the floor, unconscious, his breath coming in ragged, broken gasps. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Sebastian stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm. He turned slowly. Stella was standing by the wall, clutching the leather ledger to her chest. She was trembling, but she was unharmed. "Is he?" she asked. "He is finished," Sebastian said hoarsely. "He will face the hangman for treason and attempted murder. The book ensures that." He walked toward her. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving him exhausted. He stopped in front of her, reaching out with his uninjured hand to touch her face, as if to confirm she was real. "We survived," he whispered. Stella didn't speak. She dropped the book and threw her arms around his neck. Sebastian caught her, burying his face in her smoke-scented hair. They held each other in the ruins of the old world, while outside the storm finally broke, and the first grey light of dawn began to creep through the shattered windows. 3 months later, the ballroom of Blackwood Manor was restored. The scorch marks were gone, replaced by fresh silk and gold leaf. The chandeliers sparkled with 1,000 candles, casting a warm, golden glow over the 500 guests. The music began. A waltz. At the top of the grand staircase, the master of ceremonies struck his staff against the floor. "His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood," he announced. And Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackwood. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sebastian appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked magnificent in formal black velvet, but no one was looking at him. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Stella Caroline, now Stella Thorne, wore a gown of deep, shimmering crimson. She wore no veil. Her head was held high, a diamond tiara resting on her chestnut curls. She looked down at the crowd that had once ignored her when she scrubbed their floors. Then she looked up at Sebastian. He smiled, a true, rare smile that reached his blue eyes. "Are you ready, my love?" he asked. "I am done running, Sebastian," she replied softly. He offered his hand. "Then let us dance." As they descended the stairs and stepped onto the floor, the crowd parted. Sebastian pulled her close, his hand resting possessively on her waist, right where he had felt her trembling that first night. But she wasn't trembling now. They spun into the center of the room, the crimson dress swirling around them like a fire that could never be extinguished. And the Duke had found the only thing worth more than his title. He had found his equal. And that, my friends, is the legend of the Crimson Duchess. From a fugitive maid, scrubbing floors, to the savior of the Blackwood line. It's a reminder that sometimes the person who saves you is the one you least expect. Lucian, by the way, was found guilty by the King's Court and exiled, never to set foot in England again. Stella's father was posthumously exonerated, his name restored to the history books. I hope you enjoyed this journey of mystery, betrayal, and romance. If this story moved you, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button to help us reach more listeners. And tell me in the comments, if you were Stella, would you have forgiven Sebastian for his family's past, or would you have taken the money and run? I read every single comment. Make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell turned on. Next week, we are telling the true story of a pirate king who fell in love with the governor's daughter. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep the secrets safe.